Joining us now is a man who needs no introduction to this audience, but of course, we've been doing him for over a decade now, probably about 12 years, but it's always great to have Eric Peters on. He and I have a very similar take on the world and what we see happening, and we are very concerned about liberty and mobility because we know the government wants to take both of those from us, and they're working very hard to do that. EricPetersAutos.com is where you can find information about liberty and mobility. It's always great to have you on. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
Oh, thank you for having me. I always enjoy our get-togethers.
Well, thank you. I wanted to, before we get into some of your articles, you got some great stuff, and a new tactic that they're rolling out in the cars to surveil us, of course, because it has to be 100% surveillance of everything that we do. There is an interesting article that was on the New York Times on Wednesday. The American EV has been crushed, and they even show a picture of a crushed vehicle. And it says, we'll take the U.S. auto industry with it. And they started to go through this saying, well, you know, EVs were doing great. The global sales were booming. But now the American automobile manufacturers, for some reason, they're just crazy. They've decided that they need to move away from these things, and it may make them obsolete, they said. And it's kind of interesting to look at this perspective and how they're trying to breathe life into this thing like it was Mitch McConnell. You know, it's what is your take on this? Why is...
Well, let's see. I try to move away from pancreatic cancer, too, whenever I get the chance.
Well, they even talk about this, about how they're losing a lot of money. It looked like a real boom time. They were getting all these generous subsidies, and the consumers are getting generous subsidies and everything. But and their sales went up by 66%. And you look at that, it's like, well, you know, if I was selling by selling 3 of these things one year and I sold 5 the next year, hey, I got a 66% increase. Well, that's a nice way to put a spin on those numbers. The reality is that if you're selling 5 cars, you're going to stay in business. Doesn't matter if it's a 66% increase.
Well, and the other thing is that even during the so-called boom times, they were still losing money. During the 3 years that Ford was attempting to sell the F-150 Lightning, their flagship electric vehicle, they were reportedly losing about $20,000 on each sale. So you can imagine how long you can keep going down that road, you know, before you hit the dead end. And that's just been it's been the same across the industry. Another really good example is Lucid. You know, Lucid is kind of the darling child of the EV apologists because it's sort of the ultra uber, you know, the most spectacular of all EVs. They've not yet made a single cent. They have lost a staggering amount of money. They have gone into bankruptcy or threatened bankruptcy multiple times before they found somebody to bail them out. At what point do you recognize this is not a money-making proposition?
Yeah,
you know?
I know. Yeah, and you and I, one of our favorite dead horses that we like to beat are the self-driving cars. Did you catch what happened on the 4th of July? All the issues created a massive traffic jam. I think it was in San Francisco. They just stopped because they ran out of juice, and then they were bricked and you couldn't move them. And they were all over the place. It was like 5 dozen of them all over the city that were causing issues like that. Some of them driving through in the last month or so. We've had them driving through floods. On the 4th of July, one of them drove through an intersection over a box of fireworks. That's got to make you nervous when you're sitting in an EV.
You know, actually, this gives me heart because it's easy to get depressed when you hear about the AI and how, you know, essentially the Terminator scenario is imminent and we're all going to be crushed underfoot. I don't think AI is as smart as they think it is.
No, I don't either. And that's the other part of it is that it may not be that smart, yet it still may take the economy down because they have created such a bubble on it. When people finally figure out the emperor's got no clothes and the AI is not your next god, that may be what happens.
Yeah, and speaking of the Waymo stuff, did you hear about the car that imprisoned the 2 teenagers and called the cops?
Yeah, that's right.
It's good for doing that. Used to be the cops had to come looking for you. Now the car takes you to the cops.
Maybe it does a breathalyzer as well. Yeah, there was also another article about how many 911 calls, 911 calls they have to make because people fall asleep in them. And they can't wake them up, and so they're not sure if the person's had a health issue or if they've just fallen asleep. Typically, they've just fallen asleep, but they have to call 911 to come out there and to revive them. So it's so entertaining, isn't it?
If it weren't so tragic, it would be funny.
Yeah.
You know, And a footnote to this whole EV thing: it looks like Trump has finally fulfilled his promise about the tiny cars. Did you hear about this one?
No, I didn't hear this.
Trump
He's
and
got a
Duffy.
promise that he fulfilled? I hadn't heard that. Yeah.
Well, y'all got to give you some details on it. So Trump and Duffy, his transportation secretary, made a big splash the other day about how at last Americans are going to be able to buy the tiny car. Well, the tiny car turns out to be the Fiat Topolino, which is a micro electric car. It's a golf cart. It doesn't even have a door. It has a rope. People will be allowed to buy the Fiat Topolino. Of course, you can't operate the Fiat Topolino legally on any road in this country. And even if it were legal, you couldn't use it because its top speed is 25 miles an hour.
Really? Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I've been in certain communities, whether it's in Florida or South Carolina, an island that was down there, and they allow people to drive golf carts on the road. But yeah, that's a completely different thing, isn't it? That's exactly what we need.
Now the kicker is guess how much this little Fiat Topolino EV golf cart is?
Oh, no idea. What?
$15,000.
Wow. Yeah, none of these things are cheap. I mean, I've looked at some of these off-road things, and it surprised me how expensive they were. That's kind of typical for these things.
Well, the kicker to me is that you can buy the Topolino for $15,000, but you're not allowed to buy an actual tiny car such as the Mazda Flare, which I profiled a few weeks ago. The Mazda Flare is a little four-door gas engine car that you can get in Japan for $10,000.
Wow.
That has a top speed of close to 100 miles an hour. So it's absolutely viable on highways and anywhere else. Now, it's not compliant. It doesn't have 6 airbags and it doesn't meet roof crossover standards and all this. But the point is, here's a $10,000, an actual tiny car. That's the kind of thing that Trump hinted, that people were going to be able to buy in this country. Of course, he pulled the rug out from under that. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating to me because he's supposed to be a populist. Why doesn't he get out there and have a press conference and say, look, I think that Americans ought to be able to buy cars like this. That little Mazda is one of many, as you know.
Yeah.
There are whole fleets of these under $15,000, completely functional, completely viable little vehicles that other people are allowed to buy in other countries that we are not allowed to buy.
Yeah.
Well, Trump he's quite able to act unilaterally when it comes to getting this country into stupid wars and various other things. So why not actually do something that people might actually like that would enhance his popularity? Get on TV and say, look, I'm waving my executive pen, and I'm going to decree that Americans shall have the opportunity to buy these cars if they want them. It will be legal for dealers to sell them. Of course, he'll never do that.
No. And I bet when we look at this, we'll find out that one of his family members has got stock in this Fiat thing.
No doubt.
That's typically, that's probably why this happened. There's probably somebody in his family. What's that?
They're perfect for Mar-a-Lago. I mean, they're really cute.
Yeah.
Look up a picture of them. They're super cute little things. If you've got a multi-million-dollar golf course and you want your guys to be able to drive around in what look like little cars, there you go. Very fun.
Yeah.
We love it.
Well, they won't let you drive a dune buggy, right? It's
can't even know.
Can't get that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you look at what they allow us to have and what they don't allow us to have. And you go back to this New York Times article, they're saying, oh, it's these American cars. They don't know what they're doing. And yet they go down the list of all these different car companies that are shutting down their line and shutting down EVs. So you got Ford, you got GM and a Buick that was there. You got Dodge axing the battery-powered Charger. Jeep, they had 2 plug-in hybrids that they discontinued. Honda, Nissan, Acura, and another one that's done by GM. So it's like, this is not simply American. This is reality across the board. The New York Times just doesn't care about what reality is, and they don't care what the marketplace wants. They don't care what people can afford either.
No, ideology drives this.
That's right.
Failed Volkswagen, which is a major player in Europe, and at one time was the world's largest car company, along with Audi. The Volkswagen Group, which also includes Porsche. Anyway, the news broke the other day that Volkswagen is going to cut its current product portfolio, in other words, the number of models that it sells, by half, because things are that bad, because they've lost that much money. And part of that is, the failure of the EVs that they've been bringing out. They had intended to have nothing but EVs by now. Well, they brought out models like, the most egregious example is that electric bus the ID-1s, which was supposed to recall the hippie van from back in the 60s and the 70s.
I
And it's a
remember
neat
seeing it.
little thing, but it's $60,000,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a range of 220 something miles, best case. I mean, that's fine for older retired people, I guess, who want a little fun second car. But as a practical car, it's utterly useless. And the sales were so dismal that after the first year that it was available, they actually just canceled it for a year. Now they're bringing it back again, and maybe hoping they're going to be able to sell some more of them. But it's going over like a lead Hindenburg. It's not going to work. It's got nothing to do really with how you stand on the environment and greenness and all of that. At the end of the day, the bottom line is most people in this country have places to go.
That's
They
right.
don't want to sit for even 10 minutes. Here, the latest thing they try to say is, oh, we got it down to 10 minutes. 10 minutes, you'll be able to get, 100 miles of charge in 10 minutes. Who wants to sit at one of these stupid chargers waiting for 10 minutes to get 100 miles of range? And the answer is almost nobody.
That's right. Not to mention the expense and all the rest of the stuff. And, I've seen the pictures of that Volkswagen van many, many times. I've not seen a single one in reality, not a single one anywhere on the road. So, really what they're talking about, aren't they, Eric? It's not EVs, it's not electric vehicles, it's IVs, ideological vehicles.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And, IV is apt in another way because you're tethered.
That's right. You're tethered, and it's on life support as well.
Yeah, and there's so many compounding hassles. I did an article based on my own experience, and my experience is pretty extensive driving these things. I've driven dozens of them now, and just the act of dealing with the chargers is an ordeal relative to filling up your car with gas. For one thing, they're not standardized. Can you imagine that? That's how ill-conceived this was.
Wow.
Every gas has a standardized nozzle. It doesn't matter what gas station you go to, what the brand is. You don't have to think about it. You pick up that handle that it's going to fit your tank, right?
Right.
That's not the way it is with EVs. They've got, each manufacturer, they have different types of things. And sometimes you have to use an adapter to get the thing to fit. The other thing is they try to make it look like a gas pump. They have a handle and a nozzle. High voltage DC electricity. So it's got these very thick cables, really thick, heavy cables. And I'm a guy, and I'm trying to manhandle and manipulate this thing and try to get it around, try to get it and then aim it at the really complicated plug, which is sort of something like if you've ever dealt with like if you have a generator for your house, it's got that funky plug with multiple prongs on it.
Yeah.
It's kind of awkward to do to plug that in. It's not like another plug. You just plug it in. You don't even really have to think about it. This, you have to aim it right, line it up right, push it in there. Then once you've done that, then you have to go through all this rigmarole of getting the thing to accept your debit or credit card. You can't pay cash. There's no human attendant. A lot of these charging kiosks, they want you to download an app. They want you to scan a code, all this stuff.
Of course, they don't want you to pay cash, and they want you on their app and all the rest of it because they want to get data about you as well. That's a big part of all this, everything you do.
Thinking, okay, so today, the last time I did it, it was a nice day, but imagine it's pouring rain or it's, -7 degrees outside or something. You're standing there trying to wrestle with this stupid hose, trying to get the stupid thing to read your card, get it all lined up. And finally, at last, it starts to charge, and now you get to, what are you going to do? I got to sit here for at least 15 to 20 minutes to get any kind of meaningful charge put in the thing when I could have completely filled my gas tank in 3 or 4 minutes and been on the road and back. It doesn't matter where you fall on the ideological spectrum. You have to be a masochist to be willing to put up with that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And you talk about, well, if it's really cold out there, you had a situation, I remember, where you needed to have a charge for the EV that you were test driving, and it was too cold for it to take a charge. It had to get the battery up to a certain temperature, and it couldn't do that, so it wouldn't take the charge.
Yep. And meanwhile, the EV is desperately struggling to keep its battery pack at an optimum temperature for charging. And guess what? That burns electricity.
Yeah, I know.
This was not well thought out, except in the sense that they figured that this would be the way to deprive a lot of people of their freedom of mobility. That ultimately is, in my opinion, what this has always been about.
It truly is. And of course, that's really what the flock cameras are about too, isn't it? Basically, a way to take collection for geospatial intelligence. And that's where these guys have been focused ever since the internet became practical. I've talked about this many times. You go back to the 1960s, and the internet was designed by a DARPA psychologist. And he called it the Intergalactic Computer Network, right? They shortened it up to Internet. but they couldn't really do anything practical until the 1990s. And when they did that, all of a sudden you had a bunch of venture capital firms that one of them created by the CIA, Incutel, but the others had all these people from the CIA and from NSA that were there to hand out big money to the people that they were going to allow to be competitors. And may the best man win, but no matter who it is, all these competitors are going to do what we want to do, and that is to collect all this information about you. Now this is all coming together at this point in time, and one of the vital aspects of this is the flock camera, which can identify your car specifically and identify the idiosyncrasies about your car, not just the automated license plate reader. And so we got a lot of people who are pushing back against this. I played a clip this week of what's happening in Houston. They got people who are chopping these things down, and the police can't get any leads on it because nobody wants to give them any information. You got a guy in New Mexico who was proud to chop these things down. They did catch him. He was chopping them off, and they put up a sign that said, "You're welcome." And this guy is a real fighter, and he understands exactly what this is about. Your article, you talk about it, and you say the problem isn't flock or ring. What is the problem?
Well, in my opinion, I guess let's put this in some context. I grew up in the DC area, so there are a lot of tourists in the DC area. And I remember as a kid, you'd walk on the mall and you'd see people taking pictures and using video recorders. Back then they were kind of clunky, but nonetheless, people were taking videos. Never bothered me. The reason it didn't bother me was because who's going to see this? Maybe that family is going to see my picture. And as far as they're concerned, who am I? They have no ability to recognize me as an individual, and to create a database about me or you, and then to use that in some way against us or to monetize us. So that's the distinction. The cameras themselves are not the problem, in my opinion. The problem is the government and the corporations that basically are incestuously involved right now and are using these as another tool to compile databases about us, to track our movements. They can individualize this. That's what's wrong with this. That's what needs to be attacked, in my opinion, not so much the cameras themselves. The Ring things are particularly egregious because, these are ordinary people buying them. They're putting in the Ring doorbell camera because, porch pirates, they don't want the guy to rip off their Amazon package. The thing is, when you buy a Ring camera, you're agreeing to let the hive mind access all of the data stream that's coming through the Ring camera. So, it's not just a private security camera for your house. There's nothing wrong with that. Right. The problem is that, all this stuff is going through you to somebody else, to something else, to some entity out there. That's the problem.
That's right. And I've talked about this many times, and it goes back to what we're talking about with social media. I've seen so many times libertarians who will say, well, corporations can do whatever they want. It's the government that I'm worried about. And then the lefties will have a different approach. Well, I don't care if the government does it because I trust them. I don't want those corporations knowing that they might try to sell something to me or something. Well, I'm a lot less threatened by that than I am by the government. But of course, the two of them are working together, as you point out. And the reality is that when they take our freedoms, when they shut down our speech on social media, when they do these other things, the purpose of government, as I've been saying as we hit this 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the purpose of government is to secure our rights. And so if somebody is censoring me or they're spying on me or whatever, they're violating my privacy or freedom, the government should be stopping that. Just like if somebody was trying to physically harm me or to kill me or shoot me, the government should step in and do something about that. And that's why we theoretically have a government. And yet they don't. Instead, they partner with them and they encourage that. And that's the thing that I think people need to start to set up and pay attention to. And people are starting to pay attention to the flock camera now as well.
As well, they ought to. I mean, my God, even the word itself, it's insulting, isn't it? Flock, as in a herd of sheep, as in animal, right?
That's
they
right.
Tell us, don't they, what they have in mind?
Yeah.
It's just vile on so many levels, and I think that the time has come to push back. Ordinarily, I'm somebody who's very much a respecter of property rights, and but if we don't have privacy, we have nothing. Privacy and mobility, these two things, if we don't have them, we have nothing. We're not free. They're creating a system in which we are all presumptively guilty. In prison, the term panopticon really actually at one time referred to a kind of ideal prison, the panopticon, where inside the prison, everybody in the prison would be monitored all the time. and the authorities within the prison would know exactly what each prisoner was doing all the time.
That's right.
Okay, they're in there because they're criminals. Just okay, so that makes some sense. I don't like the idea that we're all to be considered presumptively criminal. Everything has been upended in this country. It used to be this idea that you had to have done something as an individual, you specifically. Minimally, you had to have given some specific probable cause for there to be an investigation. For a cop to start to look at you, you had to have done something to give him, there's something not right. That guy's doing something that suggests to me he may be involved in some kind of criminal activity. Fine. I don't have an issue with that. I don't think anybody has an issue with that. I do have an issue with essentially having to prove that I didn't do something.
That's right. That's right.
In my article, I just cited a couple of examples. One was this poor woman, she hears a knock at the door. She goes to answer the door, and it's a cop there, a very aggressive cop, who starts accusing her of stealing packages from people's doors, because he says the flock cameras saw her vehicle, in the vicinity of where these packages were stolen. And she had nothing to do with that. She didn't do it. Nonetheless, this cop is accusing her. And she ended up having to not only deal with this belligerent, aggressive cop, ultimately she had to spend her time proving that she was innocent using her own camera. She happened to have one in her car, thank God. So she could prove, that it was not her. But this is where we're at now, where the algorithm decides you've done something, and then they sick the cops on you.
And I've seen several cases of that. People who were arrested. One guy spent like 50 days in jail. They wouldn't believe him. He was in a different state when all this stuff happened, and they wouldn't accept any proof from him because, hey, the computer said that you are that person, so we're going to trust the computer. But Eric, what you're talking about was something that was mentioned in one of the communities where they're pushing back against the flock cameras. And the guy was saying, we have this situation where we're all considered to be terrorists and we're all guilty until we somehow prove that we're innocent. I thought, well, where did that come from? It sounds like TSA, doesn't it?
It goes back even farther than that. I've been riding this hobby horse, whacking the pinata, whatever you want to call it, for a long time. I objected when they first rolled out these DWI checkpoints, sobriety checkpoints, because in my opinion, that was the first modern test case of this idea that people are to be treated as presumptively guilty of something. They did it in the name, and it was just a very emotionally difficult to argue against thing, because, oh my gosh, nobody likes the drunk driver who blows through the red light and kills the family, right? Very hard. You put yourself in the position, oh, you're defending drunk drivers.
Yeah.
No, I'm defending our right to not be presumed to be a drunk driver simply because I'm driving. The fact that I happen to be driving doesn't mean I'm drunk. Nonetheless, people have gotten used to that idea that you have to disprove that. You have to establish to the satisfaction of a cop that you're not drinking. And meanwhile, he's checking out your car, making sure your paper's in order and all this other stuff. Well, that began in the 80s, as you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So once that became precedent, that's how case law works, precedent. So once the precedent was established, it really wasn't that much of a leap, once we had 9/11, for, people to be treated as presumptive terrorists at the airport and have to, prove to the satisfaction of another government agent that, you're not actually trying to board the plane to hijack it.
That's right.
All this nonsense.
And if you got a line of people, because they got a traffic stop here where they're doing sobriety tests or whatever, and you don't want to wait in that line, so you turn around and you go, they're going to come after you, right? And that's what we've just seen with the ICE situation. We've had a couple of situations where people have been killed in the last couple of weeks. And for the most part, it's because they're looking at these masked agents and their reputation of brutality and intimidation and confrontation. So they decide, well, I'm going to run for it, right? And that is a license for them to kill, they think. And so we've had several of these situations with that. And I keep telling everybody, look, the most dangerous situation you've got is not a terrorist or a drunk driver or an illegal immigrant who has come in from another country that's criminal. The worst case scenario is a criminal government that terrorizes its own citizens and does so with impunity. That is the worst case scenario. That's what we have to guard against, number one, before we even worry about genuinely criminal illegal aliens. But in a lot of cases, they're going after people who basically didn't file paperwork. They've lived peacefully and law-abiding citizens. Maybe they voted and they shouldn't have voted. But the bottom line is, this is like not having car insurance or something, right?
It's a technical foul kind of an offense. Yeah. And there's this kind of false, fatuous idea that you can eliminate all risk. And of course you can't. No matter what happens, there's always going to be something that can happen. So the question becomes one of balance. Do we want to treat everybody as a criminal because there are some criminals?
Yeah, that's
I'd
right.
rather just, of course, occasionally you're going to have a guy who's drunk and blows through a light and kills people. That's going to happen no matter what, even with these drunk driving laws.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It continued on even after they had the traffic stops and all the rest of the stuff. So it's not a perfect world, and they're not going to be able to catch everybody, but it's the same type of thing we say, we got to protect the kids. So everybody's going to have an ID to get on the internet. They go to the worst case scenario. They use a maximum amount of force. The interaction that they have is totally disproportionate to the crime that they have. And that's the key thing when we look at it. And it's only going to get worse because when we look at these flock cameras, I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but now the latest thing is that they, we talk about flock being a bunch of sheep, and that's true, but it can also be a bunch of birds, right? Well, now they've got flying cameras. They're going to have drone swarms, and that's the latest thing for the police departments to get into is flying surveillance cameras.
Yeah, I take a little bit of pleasure in reading news stories about these guys who are going out there with sawzalls, and taking down the flock cameras. But the fact is that we could easily end up with a scenario as depicted in the movie adaptation of Orwell's 1984, the one with John Hurt that you might remember. It vividly portrayed this world in which even walking down a path in the woods was fraught with peril because they had integrated the cameras and the microphones into the trees and the plants.
Yes.
You never knew when you were being listened to and observed. So the response of these people is going to be, well, we can't have these things obviously on poles anymore, so we're just going to hide them. They'll never know where they are. They'll just know they're being watched. And welcome to East Germany. All of a sudden, we are literally living in East Germany, where you're under constant 24/7 surveillance. And they'll have accepted it, I guess, because they think, oh, we're being kept safe. It's horrible.
That reminds me of Patrick McGowan's The Prisoner. I'm sure you know about that, right?
Yeah.
And when I saw that, back in the 60s, I thought, wow, that's just over the top insane and very crude compared to, production values but it still works very effectively. And that's really where we are right now. The statues have eyes and everything's got a camera and everything is watching you constantly, piping it back to the control center where they're going to pay special attention to anybody that doesn't toe the line.
Yep, including in your car.
Yeah.
That Waymo that we were talking about earlier, there were a couple of teenage boys in the car, and they were doing what teenage boys do. They went out and they got some booze and they got some water pistols, and they were, being driven around in the Waymo car, squirting people with the squirt guns, harmless teenager stuff. Anyway, the car, has cameras, and it was watching them do this.
Oh yeah.
And so,
people are watching them do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So once it realized they were doing something bad, that's when the car got triggered, and that's when, and I don't know whether it actually locked them in, but it summoned the cops, and it went to a parking lot, and it shut down, and then the cops came. Well, it's not just the Waymo cars. That's private property, and I guess Waymo can put cameras in its cars if it wants to. That's sort of analogous to if you go into a store and they have security cameras there because they've got to deal with shoplifters. I don't have an issue with that. But your car, it's your property, at least nominally. You bought it, you paid for it, right? And now you're being watched inside your car, and somebody else is watching you and keeping track of what you're doing. And if you do something they don't like, then they are going to intervene. And that's where we're headed.
I think, especially when we look at these humanoid robots that they want to use as your own personal C-3PO, right? There's one company called Neo, and it's got this nice, soft surface. They cover it, instead of it being hard plastic or something, they cover it in like a wool sock or something. So it's got a couple of holes there like eyes. And they just released a new update to the hands. And they were showing how the hands were very, very delicate. They could do all types of things, hold a very delicate martini or something like that. At one point, it unzips the zipper on somebody's jacket. And a guy who was looking at it made a comment, said it's kind of inappropriate for them to kind of use this with some sexual overtones because it's got this jazz music in the background. He goes, because the reality is they've already told people that these robots that they're putting in your house, they don't think on their own. They're going to be controlled by people who are watching you, let's say in India maybe, or some other place where they can get cheap labor. But there's human beings who are using this thing to walk around and look at your house. That's a big issue. And so he made it about that, and the person said, "How dare you, mock the fact that we have this very dexterous hand that we have created here and everything, and what a perverted take on it." It's like, well, the perverted take is that you would put this robot in somebody's house and you would sit to spy on them and follow them around the house.
I wonder how far this will go. A lot of people are kind of creeped out by the flock cameras and the ring cameras, yet they fill their houses with these smart devices that have cameras and microphones. I wonder how they'll feel when the time comes that they start putting cameras and microphones in their bathroom, their bedroom.
That's right.
So that some person in Mumbai can watch what goes on in the bathroom, in the bedroom. Will they be comfortable with that too?
Well, we already had issues of that where somebody has some of these glasses like Meta is selling, and somebody sets the glasses down, and then, the wife comes in and gets ready for bed or something, and there's somebody watching this in India, the whole time. And it's not theoretical. I mean, they've done this over and over again. We actually joke about it when they say AI. Sometimes it means actually Indians that are looking at this stuff, because they did that. You had what was it? Whole Foods, I think, was pushing the idea that you just put stuff in your shopping cart, and the AI cameras are just going to total the stuff up in real time, and you just put everything in there and walk out, and we'll charge it to you. Well, it turned out that it was just a whole bunch of people in India that were busy, totaling this stuff up as they watched what you were doing.
It's just absolutely incredible, remarkable that people are willing to buy into this stuff. But it's happened so fast. I think there's also sort of a whiplash factor for the flock and the ring things. People have to get their head around and realize what's going on. An aspect of this that's interesting to me is that it's a tool, right? And any tool can be used for good things or bad things. And the problem we have is that people are sometimes bad. So you put this tool in the hands of authoritarian types like cops. There have been already a bunch of instances of cops who want to stalk women. They see some woman that they're interested in, and they go through the flock camera, find out where she lives, find out where she works, where's she going. I mean, it's like a serial killer's fantasy land. And so the idea that somehow you're going to prevent that kind of power from being misused is infantile. Because you just simply have to blank check, say, no, you can't use this at all, period.
That's right.
Precisely because it is inherently abusive. It's not that it can be abused, it's inherently abusive.
Yeah, we get stars in our eyes because of the technology that's involved. And it's like, oh, this is like Jetson stuff. And it's like, let's go back to human nature, right? And that was the type of approach that when we talk about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, they understood what human nature was about. They understood how the power and the money of political office would always corrupt people. And so they said, let's play these different power groups off against each other. And yet we have gotten past that, and they have worked out over the last 250 years how to consolidate their power and to get rid of those checks and balances. And it's a very dangerous situation. What you're talking about in terms of cops stalking people, I covered that this last week. There was a particular case that was very egregious down in Florida. And there was a cop who, if you've ever been down the Florida Keys, they've got a very, very long, narrow bridge that's down there. And so he met somebody when he was working a security detail, and they were doing a TV program. He liked her. And so he starts stalking her, and he gets her information, and he puts her in the hot list for Flock. He thought she was hot, so he put her in the list. And that way he gets ID wherever she is and wherever she moves. And he used that to track her down. And he nearly had several head-on collisions in terms of other cars as he is, doing wild maneuvers to try to get around the cars that were between him and her so he could pull her over.
Yeah. You may have heard the other thing that happened a few days ago. There was a guy who does what I do. He writes and reviews new cars, and he happened to be driving a Land Rover, I think it was. And he got pulled over, on a false stolen car report that Flock had put out, apparently. And I think it was a gun count point. So, this guy, he's driving a press vehicle like I drive press vehicles. And all of a sudden he finds himself surrounded by a bunch of, trigger happy cops, who are thinking he's some kind of, armed and dangerous felon. And I worry about that. The cars that I drive have funky plates. If you've ever seen the manufacturer tags, they're sort of odd alphanumerical, not like normal plates. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll say manufacturer on it. And I can see that might, cause the flock camera to get triggered. And then all of a sudden it sends out, the alert, and all of a sudden you find yourself staring down the wrong end of a Glock. It's just not good.
Well, it can get worse. I mean, they can send out Ed 209 from RoboCop, right, to
Right.
pull you over, and that's not too far away, I guess. You've got
RoboCop actually was benevolent, though. The thing I think we're headed toward is a Judge Dredd scenario. Remember
Yeah,
that movie?
that's right.
I am the law.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that we're facing right now.
And,
Sorry, I
and
didn't
when I
mean.
look at what he's doing, what Trump is doing with the ICE agents, that's basically what I see about all this stuff. He cheered Robert Duterte in the Philippines when that was exactly what Robert Duterte was telling his police force to do. He said, if you see somebody you think they're part of the drug trade, you have authority to kill them. And so they did a lot of extrajudicial killings. And he is now before the International Criminal Court because the next administration that came in gave him up. I think that's perhaps what Rubio and some of the other people in the Trump regime are thinking about with this. Is like, hey, they could impeach us and kick us out of office. The other thing they could do is they could hand us over to the ICC because they have committed international war crimes. No doubt about it.
Yep, these things are consequential. A lot of Americans were cheering. Before this awful war started, these images of the American military killing people extrajudicially out on the open sea, allegedly because they were smuggling drugs. Even in the most egregious case where they had disabled the boat and these guys are bobbing in the water helplessly, and they go and kill them.
That's right. That is
And
a war crime, even if it was a war. That is a war crime condemned by the Pentagon, condemned by the Geneva Convention, international law, you name it. That's always a crime.
Well, and even if, this is like a cynical point of view, even if you don't particularly care about the horror of people being murdered in that manner, which is what it was, precedent, you let that stand and you think that somehow the power isn't going to be turned on you at some point.
That's right.
And that is the danger. And unfortunately, not enough people in this country see it or understand it.
Well, certainly, again, we go back to the founders. Madison did. He said the instruments of war abroad will be used as a means of tyranny at home. And that's what's happening with this flying swarms of drones that are out there. They should call it Skynet, I guess. They call it Skydio. Or maybe you could call it, I don't know. I've got a lot of things I could call it, but I can't say them on radio.
This is like a whole rabbit hole discussion, but
yeah,
it's interesting about predictive programming. Do you remember the original Terminator that came out in 1984? So that's a long time ago, 40 years ago. And if you go back and watch that movie and look at the AI-driven flying things that the machines were using to kill the humans, they're very much like the drones that we have now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely are. Yeah, the people who are doing that Skydio thing, they were using that for military purposes. And now they're going to use it to spy on Americans for the police state. That's how this goes. And so there is a war against us and a war against the Constitution, and they consider us all to be their enemies domestically. They are practicing this stuff abroad, but they're bringing it home now. And the same thing is true of Palantir. Palantir is famously about that, started that way, working with military. Now they're coming back to tie all the different places that they've got data silos together. They're going to get rid of all those and make one gigantic database that's there.
Did you catch Tucker Carlson's interview with Mike Adams the other day?
Mm-mm.
It's really good. He made an observation that I thought was very trenchant. And it is that these people, meaning the people in the corporations and the government, it's not just that they're lying to us and seeking to exploit us. They hate us. They actively seek our harm. And it's extremely important to get your mind around that, to understand the mentality that we're dealing with. That's right. It's not just the shady used car salesman who's trying to sell you a lemon and pocket some money. It's somebody who is sadistic, who hates you, who wants to hurt you. Recognize that. Understand that. That's what we're up against.
That's right. Yeah, I had a friend who worked for the government. He was high-ranking in the military, and I would have those discussions with him. I knew him from high school, and he said, well, you never attribute malice to somebody if you explain it by incompetence. It's like, Well, I don't necessarily buy that. You might want to believe what they say when they are saying some malicious things about how they want to harm people, how they want to depopulate the world, and all the rest of the stuff they refer to us as viruses. You name it. I mean, we've seen the animosity from these people over and over again. Just take a look at the World Economic Forum. I mean, it just drips with contempt for humanity.
My most recent article, which touches on this business of the, as they put it, speed limit assistance technology. The story broke originally, I think, in the UK Guardian. An EU apparatchik, a bureaucrat within the EU regulatory regime, said, all along this has been about making it so that cars can't be driven any faster than we decree that they are going to be allowed to drive. We do it incrementally. And I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but words to that effect. So, first of all, they use etymological jujitsu. They call it assistance, which makes it sound benign. Oh, we're just helping you, right?
Yeah.
But it's not about that. To get people used to the initial phase, I call it first base. First base is when you get a chime and you get a little light that lights up in the dashboard. Oh, helpy helperson, you're driving faster than the speed limit. We just wanted to let you know so you can slow down. The next thing, second base, which is already required in Europe, is throttle pushback. So, if you go faster than whatever the speed limit is, you're pushing on the gas pedal. I felt this. I've experienced it. It pushes back against you to prevent you from driving anything. Now, you can still push through it. You just have to push down harder, and then you can override it. Third base is when you can't do that anymore. And the guy was admitting that that's been the agenda all along, that they understood that they couldn't roll it out all at once because, frog in the boiling water.
That's right.
The frog might jump out. They get people used to it, but this is the end goal. This is where we're headed ultimately.
Well, I think ultimately they're not just going to control how fast you go, but where you can go. They're going to geofence areas away from you. And we've already seen that in a crude way. They've already started with their 15-minute cities. And you look at the UK, places like Oxford and so forth, they put up bollards and things to block the road off so people have to take the circuitous route. And they're only allowed to, if they get out of their little village that they're put into, like Patrick McGowan, and if they can get out of their little confines like once a month or something like that. But so we'll give a little bit of a pressure valve for now, right? But eventually that's going to go away as well. It's kind of like what the cities. Let's see, what was it? There was a group of C40, that was what it was. It was originally 40 cities. Now it's well over 100 that came together to limit people's use of all kinds of resources, limit the kind of food that you have, limit the articles of clothing that you can get to like 3 a year, and to limit your travel on planes to make sure that once every 3 years you get a trip of 900 miles or less, that type of thing. Really draconian measures that they put on there. And so they're gradually rolling this stuff out, and there'll be some physical barriers like they got in the UK, but eventually with the technology that they've got and making sure that you don't have access to something that doesn't have a literal governor on it, they'll be able to do all that stuff electronically.
Yep. And electric vehicles are really the ideal vehicle for that purpose. Even though a gas engine car has electronica and it's connected, once you filled up the tank, you have physical possession of the fuel in the tank. So, at that point, unless they shut the car off, you have the ability to drive it however far that gas will take you. Electric cars are quite different. They can send an update over the air to reduce the driving range to whatever they want. Or, they presented it, interestingly enough, I think you and I talked about this once before. A couple of years back, there was a hurricane that was bearing down on Florida. And Elon Musk, in his great benevolence, announced that he was going to have Tesla send out an update that would increase the range of the electric vehicles located in the path of the hurricane so that they could get out. And, immediately in my mind, I thought, well, that's interesting. If he can arbitrarily, by an update over the air, increase the driving range of the EV, then he can do the reverse. He can cut the range. He can turn it off entirely. So that's one of the things that EVs help to facilitate. Plus, you're tethered to this centralized control grid. I hear you can, yes, hypothetically, you can charge an EV using an off-the-grid solar system. It's very expensive. Most people can't do it. It's just not a practical thing. So you're tethered to this central grid in a way. Gas is much more decentralized than that. So that's there are lots of pieces to this, but that's part of the reason that they were pushing this electric vehicle stuff so hard.
I agree. And you and I talked about it for the longest time. That's another reason why they want to get rid of diesel. It had nothing to do with fine particulate matter or any of the rest of that stuff. It had everything to do with the fact that diesel is very versatile in terms of the kinds of fuel that you can use. It doesn't have to be highly refined, and you can make some adjustments on your diesel. You can run it off of vegetable oil if you want to. And so they had to make sure that that didn't persist as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I've mentioned to you before, I have an old diesel tractor. I don't even need a battery to start it. I can roll it down the hill and clutch start it. And then once it's running, it doesn't even need an alternator because there's no ignition system. Pure mechanical injection, compression, ignition. That's it. So, it's remarkable how simple it is and how durable it is and how eternal it is. I mean, heck, I got it from the guy who I bought my house from 20 years ago. He owned it for, the prior more than 20 years. It's still running great. It'll probably be running 20 years from now too.
Yeah, they're very durable, aren't they? Hey, speaking of durable, you got an article about Mitch McConnell, the dirty turtle and the proof of life. Isn't it amazing that they were able to keep this secret for so long? And, I think they're going to be able to run the clock out on this. They only have to keep him hidden until August the 3rd, I think, and then they can't do anything about it in terms of special election because it's too close to the actual election at that point.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of it. But for me, the more interesting aspect is the lying has gotten so blatant. You and I can remember, there going back to when we were young, that you had a suspicion, okay, the politicians are crooked, the government, it's a little snaky, but the extent, the pervasiveness of the corruption now is so manifest. I mean, this plausible notion of who was it, Thune, I guess, and some other big Republican honcho claim that they talked with the dirty turtle for 20 minutes.
Oh, there's a whole list of people out there that said, and they all talked to him, Eric, for the same amount of time, 20 minminutes.
Yeah.
Thomas Massey mocked them. He said, we talked for 20 minutes. And he said, we got to stop this war and we got to do this, and so it was real things that, of course, Mitch McConnell would never be in favor of. Yeah.
And they don't even take the effort to produce a believable AI photo.
No.
They bring out a picture of him looking at least 10 years younger and a lot healthier than he looked the last time anybody saw him, sitting chipperly in his hospital bed, wearing his jeans and his plaid shirt. It's absurd.
Yeah. No IVs, no nothing. He doesn't have a monitor on his finger checking his pulse. Nothing like that. And
he
of
was
course,
that healthy a couple of days ago when they took the picture. Why isn't he out on the Senate floor voting for whatever legislation is on the floor?
That's right. It's just absolutely amazing. And yet they beclowned themselves. We saw this all happening a year ago when they were trying to hide all the Epstein documents as well. Look at how you had Mike Johnson shut down the House a couple of weeks early before they take the entire month of August off. And then during that period of time, they had a special election, and there were now enough votes to ram this thing through. And he refused to seat the person who was having the special election, and the Congress was shut down by him, even though they have always operated in the past when they had a shutdown over the budget disagreement. He shut down the Congress to keep everybody out of that. And yet it still didn't work. And everybody just saw the corruption, but they're doing it again now with Mitch McConnell. It certainly is amazing.
I think it's a good thing, in a backhanded kind of way. I'm going to compliment Trump for the same reason. He has made it very plain to any thinking person that we're not going to vote our way out of this, that the whole system is lousy with termites and maggots, and there's just no fixing it. And that's a good thing in a way, because ultimately the government does have to rely upon the consent of the governed in order to continue to govern. And I think that's gone with the wind now at this point. I feel as though we are sort of in this moment that might be analogous to roughly 1774-ish, back during the colonial era, when at that time, if you go back and read the history of the era, they were desperately pleading with the British king and parliament, for some kind of accommodation. Let's be reasonable. Let's address our concerns. Come on, we really don't want to fight. We would just like to be peaceful and resolve this. Then came Lexington and Concord, and they finally recognized there's no.
That's right. No matter how many entreaties they made to him, he just gave them the back of his hand. And that's what we're getting from the federal government now, isn't it?
And I think that's the moment that we're in right now. I think the realization has on that this is not something that can be addressed in the manner that we've been used to for generations, longer than we've been alive. Go to the ballot box, you vote, you bring in a candidate, all that Norman Rockwell stuff, that's out the window, that's gone.
That's right.
Something is coming. Everybody understands that. And so the question is now, how are we going to manage what's coming?
I think it's very interesting because, you look at what happened with the pandemic and the arbitrary lockdown of everybody and pushing these vaccines and the masks and all the rest of this stuff. And we now see what an incredible fraud that was, right? And so it has really blown back against them in a number of ways. A lot of people have seen what was really happening in their child's classroom, let's say, for example. So we've seen a lot of pushback against that. We've seen a big increase in the number of people leaving the government schools and doing homeschooling and things like that. That was always one of their biggest arguments. Well, what about socialization? And it's like, yeah, tell me about socialization when you put masks on the kids and you make them stay 6 feet apart from each other. So, they jumped the shark on that aspect. And now you got Trump and the Republicans jumping the shark on the Epstein documents, on Mitch McConnell, and so many. They have shown themselves to be absolute pants on fire liars. And I think that is the good news that comes out of this, is that people are seeing that the emperors have no clothes, they have no integrity, and they wouldn't tell you the truth even if it was in their best interest to tell you the truth.
No, not at all. And I think things are probably going to get very interesting in the next few weeks as this stupid, evil war continues.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding, I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding based upon people who I know are experts is that the SPR, the Petroleum Reserve, is essentially empty or very close to it. And Trump has been using that to kind of buffer the price shocks that have arisen as a result of this war and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Now he thinks he can sort of go and bomb the Iranians back to the peace table. It's not going to happen.
No, it's not.
The Iranians are not going to buckle on this. And my understanding is that the whole reason for the memorandum of understanding for that 2-week pause in the war was that somebody finally got through to Trump and said, look, if you don't put a halt to this, the global economy is probably going to crash.
That's right.
We're going to have massive economic and then political problems in this country. You've got to find a way to walk it back, declare victory, and go home. So hence the MOE. Well, now we're back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now what's he going to do? Now that he's really gone full, what was a William Westmoreland Vietnam. We're just going to keep on throwing more bombs at him and, hope we're going to win. It's a disaster. And right now, everybody's kind of not talking about it, which is strange because it's getting hotter and worse all the time. And very probably we're going to be back at $4 a gallon gas by the end of next week.
Yeah. Well, they just get acclimated to things, right? And it doesn't really affect them. They can't look at the long-term picture. It's just, I'm very busy with what I do, and I've got a job, and I've got kids, and so forth and so on. I don't have time to really look at this from a long-term perspective or to think about what is going to happen down the road. I'm just dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. We saw that all throughout the 2020 nonsense that they were pulling on people, and that's what we're seeing again today, I think.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
But it'll hit when people can't fill up or they can't afford to fill up, and there's no oil. And as you pointed out, there was a lot of talk about that. People getting together with him and saying, "Look, we only got a couple of more weeks left of this." There was a lot of stuff that was already out there on the water, and you've been using that stuff up as well as the stuff that's in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So many times you talk to people about this stuff, and we talked about the effects of tariffs, which are nothing other than taxes. And so, of course, it's going to raise the price of stuff. And it's amazing to me to see all these Republicans out there and naively saying, well, no, he's going to be able to just get this money from other people, and nothing is going to change in terms of what we pay for stuff. That's like the idea that Democrats have, that they're going to be able to tax companies. If you raise a tax on a company, they're going to have to pass that along to you in their product, or they're going to go out of business. Most companies don't operate on such large profit margins. And so they can absorb that for a short period of time, and will absorb it for a short period of time because they don't want to be the first one to raise prices and put themselves at what they perceive to be a competitive disadvantage. But eventually reality will require that they raise the price. And so we started seeing that. It was delayed. And then once that happens, there's also a delay when it comes back down again, typically. But what Trump is doing is he's exploiting this manic, and it really is kind of bipolar, the stock market. It's amazing to me how many times he can go out and say something and then reverse himself that same day and show that he was never serious about it. And everybody knows that. I mean, Emmanuel Macron has called him out on it. His political opponents have called him out on it. And nevertheless, Wall Street still trades on whatever he has to say. They treat it as if it is the gospel truth, when he wouldn't know the truth if it bit him in the leg. But that's the reality of what's happening right now, is that these people are just trading on hopium. And right now the market is irrationally exuberant. there's going to come a point in time in which it becomes irrationally pessimistic. And that's when things get really bad for everybody.
I agree. There's corruption without consequence. That's the thing that runs through everything. These people, some of them know that what they're doing is deleterious and is going to hurt people, but it's abstract. They don't care because it doesn't hurt them. And look at Trump. Trump's an archetype. He's a guy who's a billionaire. Most of the people in the higher echelons of the federal government are very, very affluent people. They're the ones who are profiting from the stock market. I'm probably not coming across right now as a communist, but it's the truth. They are profiting from this greasy casino that we call the stock market.
That's right.
And enriching. They don't care that a pat of butter costs $7.
No,
Would you care? If you have $1 billion in your net worth, of course not. It's an abstract to them. They have no comprehension or understanding or caring or empathy at all for the plight of average people for whom, paying $8 for a dozen eggs, that's a really big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Having to spend $70 to fill up your gas tank, that's a big deal for, a lot of people. There's this complete disconnect between us and them at this point.
And you go back to 2020, and all they cared about were the big box retailers that trade on Wall Street, right? Mom and pop stores, close them. We don't care. People will have empty shelves while on the farms they're destroying the food because they can't get it to market. We don't care, right? And it really is you talked about maliciousness earlier on, and I think that is really the case with this. I don't think it's just incompetence. I think that there is I think Trump is their guy to push us into a fourth turning. And I don't know if we've talked about this or not, but I talk about it frequently on the show. The idea that every 80 years there is a massive sea change in society. And that's the point at which we are right now. And so within the next couple of years, that's going to happen. They wanted to have somebody in my opinion, like Trump, who is going to be an agent of chaos, who's going to be a disruptor, who is going to basically take things down, as the World Economic Forum has been so eagerly saying. We want to have a great reset. Well, he's the guy to do it for you. He's going to create problems between every country in the United States. He's going to create wars. He's going to create a global depression. You name it. He's going to do all these things. I mean, when we look at this, you remember the 1973 oil embargo. And I've been thinking about that ever since I saw what Trump did and the Strait of Hormuz getting shut down. That is a bigger shock to the system, the 1973 oil embargo. Now, we haven't felt it really yet, but it takes a while for these things to roll out.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that he has done that's the most dangerous, in my opinion, is radicalizing the younger generations who understandably are both furious and feeling utterly disfranchised and helpless about it. Just in my own bailiwick with regard to cars, when I was 25 years old, I was able to buy my Trans Am. I had no problem filling the gas tank with unleaded premium when I was 25 years old. Okay. I can't afford, I'm a middle-aged guy now, and I can't afford to fill up the gas tank anymore. I put a half a tank in it. The cars are now, the ladder has been kicked out. The young can't afford cars. I don't think it's an accident that Trump is not letting these $10,000 little tiny cars in, because that would the ladder, that would bring the ladder back down. Houses, I read the other day that the average age of a first-time home buyer in this country is now 40.
Wow.
So basically, middle-aged guy, people start families when they used to in their 20s. They got married, get their first starter home when they're around 28, 29, 30 years old. Now they're 40.
Yeah.
And the average price of a house in this country is, I think, $400,000 now, the average price.
And what happened when they were talking about, let's have something for housing affordability? And it wasn't housing affordability. It was just another version of, remember Trump said, well, let them have a 50-year mortgage or something. That doesn't help anybody. That just helps the banks. And so they look at this and they say, well, we'll make houses more affordable. What we'll do is we'll up the level of the limit right now. People are bumping up for the limit for FHA or something like that. So we'll raise that limit so they can borrow more money. That's not what we need. We need things that we can afford, not a longer credit term that they're putting out there, because that's their orientation, to help the bankers. And so, when they come up with these phony solutions, but even with that, Eric, Trump comes out and says, I don't care about that. That's not important. Do the Save America Act about voting. That's the only thing I care about. I don't care about the housing stuff. It's like, we noticed. We noticed big time. So he's pushing people towards communism, isn't he?
Yeah. On multiple occasions, he's publicly said things expressing contempt for average people's concerns.
That's right.
That plays really well out there.
Mm-hmm.
He's Marie Antoinette without her appealing qualities, and that's a serious thing. Marie Antoinette was a courtier. She was a woman who grew up in the court. She never knew anything about the outside world. She was an innocent in a lot of ways. She lived at Versailles. And so from her point of view, the story goes, she heard that the peasants they were starving because there wasn't enough bread. Well, and she looked around in the Palace of Versailles. There's cake everywhere. Well, let them eat cake. And she meant well.
Yeah.
She wasn't being mean. She was like, well, surely they can eat cake. Right?
Yeah.
Trump is far worse than that.
Oh, he is. As a matter of fact, I chuckle when you mention that, because I actually created a Marie Antoinette version of a fat Trump. He's in a dress the whole bit, and saying basically the same thing: "Let them eat cake." And I forget what that was in response to, but it was over a year and a half ago, and it was something he did right away when he got in. But that's exactly where this guy is. He is a vicious Marie Antoinette. And I can understand why these politicians are getting more and more increasingly paranoid about their own personal safety. And when you look at how he is building all this fortress around himself, hunkering down in a bunker, he's now got an anti-drone SUV that's supposed to provide security for him. Well, good luck with that. Yeah. How does that work on the battlefield in Ukraine and Russia going after each other? They're all vulnerable to that kind of stuff. He doesn't have any way to protect himself, really, from the new weapons that are out there. He's very vulnerable to that. The best thing he could do for himself is the best thing he could do for us, and that is to pursue a path of peace without foreign entanglement. But they're doing exactly the opposite, aren't they?
For a variety of reasons, he won't do that. I think right now one of the aspects of this is that he's so pathologically narcissistic. I think it drives him batty that the Iranians haven't folded. That he hasn't been able to parade like MacArthur down the street, with the laurels in his hair as the great warlord. Look, I defeated these awful Iranians. It sticks in his craw. So enraged by that and this idea that he can't be perceived as a loser, which for him is the worst imaginable thing, he's going to drag the whole world down with him, I think.
Oh, I agree. I agree. When you look at, Ron Paul was just talking about how Trump is more of a socialist, or if you want to say a fascist, than Mamdani is, because he's out there buying stock of all these different companies. He's put out like $30 billion to buy stock of 27 different companies. And they're actually buying stock in these companies and picking the winners and losers and investing in them. And that really distorts the marketplace. But it really is something, I think, if you look at most of these deals, he's also cutting side deals on this. It's very much like what the Chinese Communist Party does. And they really are fascist in their orientation. It's corruption, so that the government is going to partner with you. You'll own it. Don't worry about that. You'll have some ownership thing there. But we will too. You're going to give us a take on this. You're going to give us a cut. And that's what he's doing with his open corruption of his family. All of these things, that really does feed the narrative for the socialists and the communists. They want to portray this two-tier class system. And so he is feeding that on steroids. And we're going to wind up with a very radical left-wing government because of Trump. He's pushing people that way.
About how the recently fired factory worker who's living in his single wide in West Virginia perceives the news that Barron Trump, who's just barely 20 years old, is worth $150 million as a result of the shysterism of the Bitcoin thing, the crypto scam.
Yeah, it's meme coins,
Yeah, $150 million this kid is worth, having produced nothing, just because his father is in a position to manipulate markets and help his family make a lot of money doing it.
That's right. Yeah, they've made billions off of these coin things, but the people who have invested in these things, somebody totaled it up, and it was something like $50 billion they've ripped people off for these meme coins. It truly is amazing. It's actually, and by some metrics, it's actually worse than what Sam Bankman-Fried did, right?
Absolutely.
It really is. But of course, the other part of it is that he will not be punished. And that really does pour gasoline on the dumpster fire of the Trump administration, doesn't it?
Yeah, and of course, nobody responsible for what went on during the 4 horrible years of COVID has been brought to justice. Not a single one. Fauci's enjoying his comfortable and very affluent retirement. Walensky, and then you go down the ladder to the state level. Not one of these people has been so much as fined for the horror that they imposed on this country for 4 years.
You're right.
And I think there's percolating fury out there about it. I know I'm furious about it. I'm not prepared to forgive and forget.
Well, the reality is there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who lost family members who were literally killed in the hospitals. As one doctor pointed out, they were killing fields. They were deliberately killing people. They were denying basic treatment to people. Say, I only want the COVID patients. Why? Because Trump was paying them a 20% bonus for the COVID patients, as well as a lump fee of like $13,000 if you point your finger at somebody and say they got COVID. Then you get 20% for everything that you do for them. So they don't want anybody in the hospital that's not sick with what they can claim is COVID. So they were killing people by refusing medical treatment. And then if they get you in the hospital, they kill you with a ventilator or remdesivir. And so there's a lot of families out there. Many of them don't really understand that that's what happened. Many of them think that their family members died of COVID or something unrelated. But eventually they're going to start catching on to that. And, that's really where the worm is going to turn, I think.
I think everybody understands what was done, though, to families and friendships, to the good feeling that existed before COVID, how they turned us against each other, maskers versus non-maskers, the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, that created a nation of sadism out of what was once a country full of good and decent people. And it's horrendous, and it has got to be dealt with. It has to be purged. And until that happens, things are not going to get better, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, there's that festering thing there, that the elephant in the room, if you will. And part of it is this cult of Trump. They don't want to lay that at his door. And so, they want to pretend that it was all Fauci, for example. And, you mentioned a lot of people that were there that are all guilty with that. But, of course, there's also the people in the Trump administration. He began by putting in Alex Azar, who was a former CEO of Eli Lilly. This thing was set up from the very beginning. It wasn't I'm reacting to some news that I got here and I had the wrong reaction. I did the wrong thing. No, they planned this. Planned this. They practiced it for over 20 years. They started 2 months before 9/11. This thing was a long time in the making. And Trump was their ace in the hole. He was the guy they could put in there to pull this thing off. Can you imagine Hillary Clinton trying to do something like this?
No, and that's the genius of it. It took me a while to get my mind around it, but I really believe now. I believe that the whole thing was orchestrated. I think that Trump was in on the 2020 thing, that he could be portrayed as a martyr. Oh, look how they corrupted the election. And then we got Joe Biden. Trump was wronged by the election. And then you get Joe Biden pushing the LGBTQ stuff, the trannies in the classroom, just really obnoxious to normal people's sensibilities things for years. Then Trump comes riding in on his white Charger. I'm going to, there'll be justice. I will right the wrongs. Then they even set up, I know I'm going to really go off the deep end here. They set up that thing in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. I'll
tell
them again.
Look, they're trying to kill him,
Right.
And it worked beautifully. So they bring Trump in, everybody's ecstatic, feeling relief, at least a lot of people who voted for him. Oh, good. Things are going to go on the right track again at last. And they brought in this guy who's the perfect stalking horse, the perfect guy to bring in everything that neither Hillary nor Biden could ever have done. As you point out, all the stuff with ICE, all the stuff with the tech bros, the Palantir. It's like Trump had that meeting with Altman and the other guy Ellison and the other guy, the Chinese guy, I can't remember his name, a couple of days after his inauguration. Right there. Well, what's this all about? Erecting the surveillance state, because they knew that for the most part, all the red hats would be quiet and quiescent.
That's right.
Trump's our guy. He's our guy. We don't have to worry about Trump. And look at what's happening to us.
That's right. And the guy I used to work for, Alex Jones and Mike Adams, who I guess was just on with Tucker Carlson, they were pushing this pandemic because they were making money hand over fist, selling prepper food and all the rest of this stuff. And he sold the lies that this is all a 4D chess and trust the plan. It's a sting and all the rest of the stuff. And don't worry, the vaccine is basically sugar water. It's not the bad Bill Gates vaccine. This is the Trump vaccine. And you can trust that. I mean, I've seen this type of thing. And these people, again, I think they were a long-term plant as well, in my opinion, when I look at this. Because you got to get people, if you're going to run a long con, the purpose is to get people's confidence, right? You got to trust them. You got to trust the plan. And the reality is that the plan was to get you to trust them. That was it all along. I think it's at the point where things are really coming to a head, and it's going to be, this fourth turning is really going to come into place in 2029, 2030. They want to have their new idyllic dystopia that we look at it. They think it's utopia for them. But that's when they want to have their smart cities and all the rest of this stuff. 2030 is the date. They keep putting on all this stuff, and that just coincidentally is the end of the fourth turning when you look at these typical cycles. So I think they've got to catch stuff up. So we're going to see things changing very, very rapidly for the worse, I think, in the next couple of years. It's going to be a rough ride, I think.
But it's not all dark and dreary.
No,
we have power. And the biggest power that we have is to disconnect from them.
Mm-hmm.
First, mentally, psychologically, recognize these people are not going to come save us. And we shouldn't look to them for saving. We should look to ourselves. We should look to our families, our friends, the people that we know. In other words, the people that we can trust.
That's
because
right.
they've earned our trust.
That's
because
right.
we know them. They have a track record. And don't buy a connected car. Don't buy a car with cameras in it that's spying. Don't equip your home with smart technology. Say no to these things. The more of us that do that, the more power we get back.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And that really is what you need to have. Even if we had some kind of a natural organic disaster or something, let's say we just had a natural disaster. What do you need for that? You don't need to depend on the government being there to help you. That didn't work out too well for the people here in North Carolina and Tennessee when you had the major floods coming through there. The government came in and made things worse. And so, you need to have a local network of people that you trust, people that that and that's going to be necessary to just have basic life. And that's really the basis on which we build this all up, having a community that's there. And of course, as a Christian, that is really the basis of our life as well. And getting people together who are like-minded, people who have some skills and some abilities, that is really the key thing that's going to make the difference, I think.
I think so too. It's the proper kind of dependency. That word has gotten a bad name because it's used in context of government, when it is bad. Being dependent on government, being dependent on corporations. But we are interdependent. Children are dependent on their parents, but that's a benevolent relationship.
That's right.
We're dependent on our friends. There are things that I know how to do that I can do for my friends, and there are things I have no idea how to do that my friends can do for me. That is a positive kind of dependence.
That's right. Jared Griffin made a comment one time when I was interviewing him, and he said, we have to think, we're focused on individual liberty, but we have to think about the fact that we have to work collectively for individual liberty. And I think that's exactly right. Certainly the founders worked collectively for individual liberty. They didn't go out there atomized one-on-one and have Thomas Jefferson go against the British troops on his own. They organized and they had a plan and they had a group of people who were working collectively for their individual liberty. And I think that's really where we have to go. I really agree with you on that.
Yeah, cooperatively and non-coercively. There's nothing wrong with collective action in that context.
That's right. That's right. Well, Eric, it's always great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. And again, folks, check out his website. It's excellent. A lot of information. And it always is wonderful to get a perspective from somebody who understands liberty and understands mobility. And of course, we didn't get to it, but you also have a lot of really fine articles about great cars and great motorcycles, and a good deal of those are nostalgic as well because they're not making too many of those anymore. And so always enjoy your website. Again, it is ericpetersautos.com. Thank you so much, Eric. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Common Man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at davidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. davidknightshow.com.